Listen carefully. When the inner man awakens, you don't feel powerful. You feel finished, complete, and when these four unusual signs appear, the shadow has no choice but to obey. There comes a moment in a person's life when something quietly but irrevocably shifts. Not with spectacle, not with noise, but with a deep inner recognition that the world no longer feels the way it once did. You may not have words for it at first, only a sense that you are no longer moving blindly through life, reacting to circumstances as though they were independent powers. Something within you has stirred, and with that stirring comes an awareness that what you once called reality is far more fluid, intimate, and responsive than you were ever taught to believe. This is not an awakening that announces itself with excitement. It often arrives with a strange calm, even a subtle discomfort, because it dismantles old explanations before offering new ones. You begin to notice that your inner life carries more weight than the outer world, that moods are not merely passing states, but positions of consciousness, and that when you shift inwardly, the world answers back in ways that feel uncannily precise. Events no longer appear random in the same way. Conversations echo thoughts you never spoke aloud. Situations arrange themselves without effort, as though something unseen were coordinating details on your behalf. At first, this can feel unsettling, because it removes the comfort of believing you are at the mercy of forces outside yourself. Yet beneath that unease is a growing certainty that life is not happening to you, but through you. As this awareness deepens, you may find that you can no longer take refuge in pretending, either with others or with yourself. The inner man, long ignored, begins to assert himself, demanding honesty, alignment, and integrity at a level that feels almost uncompromising. You sense that thoughts are no longer harmless, that feelings are no longer private, and that what you consent to inwardly must sooner or later take form. This realization strips away many familiar habits, including the habit of blaming circumstances, people, or chance for the conditions of your life. What replaces it is not arrogance, but responsibility, and responsibility is a heavy thing when first assumed. There is also a peculiar loneliness that can accompany this shift, not because you are rejected by others, but because you are no longer able to fully share the assumptions that once bound you to them. Conversations feel different. The things that once animated you lose their urgency. You may sense that you are standing slightly apart from the crowd, not above it, not below it, but inwardly separated by an invisible line. This separation is not a punishment, it is a consequence of seeing. Once you glimpse the operant power within, you cannot unsee it, and pretending otherwise becomes exhausting. At the same time, there is a growing intimacy with life itself, a feeling that the world is listening, responding, and reflecting with astonishing fidelity. You begin to trust less in effort and more in alignment, less in force and more in assumption. The old struggle to make things happen gives way slowly to a subtler art, the art of being. This does not mean passivity, but a different quality of action, one that flows from inner conviction rather than outer pressure. You sense that when you are inwardly settled, things move with less friction, as though resistance had been an internal condition all along. What is awakening in you is not a new personality, nor a special status, nor a mystical badge of honor. It is the inner man, the imaginal self, the source from which all experience flows. And as this inner man awakens, life begins to reveal signs that are unmistakable to the one who is attentive, though often invisible to those still asleep to their own causative power. These signs are not rewards, they are confirmations. They indicate that consciousness has begun to recognize itself, that imagination is no longer treated as fantasy, but as reality in its formative stage. If you recognize yourself in what follows, understand this: nothing has gone wrong. Something has come alive. At the beginning of this awakening, one of the most misunderstood elements is what people casually call vibration, as though it were a mood to be adopted or an attitude to be performed. Yet, true vibration is not something you put on for the world to see. It is something you accept inwardly as real, long before the world agrees with you. It is an energetic reality born of conviction, not optimism, and conviction is never loud. When this realization dawns, you begin to understand that imagination is not a mental toy or a form of escapism, but spiritual sensation itself. It is the capacity to enter a state so fully that it carries weight, texture, and emotional authority, until it possesses the distinctness of reality within you. This is where the great distinction reveals itself. There is a profound difference between thinking of an end and thinking from the end. To think of something is to remain separate from it, to observe it as distant, desirable, but not yet yours. To think from the end is to collapse that distance entirely, to occupy the state as though it were already accomplished, not in words, but in feeling. When you think from the end, you are no longer imagining a future version of yourself. You are consenting to be that self now, inwardly, without negotiation. The inner man does not respond to verbal affirmations or hopeful statements. He responds only to states that are lived in consciousness. As this capacity strengthens, imagination stops feeling like effort and begins to feel like entry. You do not strain to picture something. You step into it. You feel the naturalness of the fulfilled desire, the quiet relief, the sense of completion that requires no explanation. This is not fantasy because fantasy is unstable and fleeting. Spiritual sensation is stable. It has gravity. When you truly enter the image of the wish fulfilled and give it sensory vividness, something locks into place. The state no longer feels hypothetical. It feels assumed, and assumption is the creative act itself. At this point, wishful thinking falls away almost automatically. There is no longer a sense of hoping something will happen, because hope belongs to the state of not having. Instead, there is a subtle but unmistakable shift into being. You are not trying to make the thing real. You are acknowledging that it already is subjectively, and that subjectivity is the only causative reality. The inner world ceases to be a rehearsal space and becomes the stage upon which reality is decided. This is why the subjective state is not a precursor to reality, but reality itself in its formative dimension. When the inner man awakens, he recognizes this truth instinctively. He understands that the outer world is not persuaded by effort, repetition, or struggle, but by the depth of your inward acceptance. The moment you fully accept a state as real within yourself, you have already crossed the threshold from desire to embodiment. What follows in the external world is not creation but confirmation, and from this point forward, imagination is no longer something you occasionally use. It becomes the place from which you live. As this inner alignment deepens, another unmistakable sign begins to surface, one that is often misunderstood or even resisted at first. The physical body, which many have been taught to see as separate from consciousness, reveals itself as an uncompromising instrument of truth. It does not negotiate with appearances, nor does it cooperate with self-deception. The body is an emotional filter, faithfully bearing the marks of the inner state you habitually occupy. Long before circumstances change, the body registers the reality of your assumptions, reflecting them with startling precision. When there is harmony between what you inwardly accept and what you outwardly claim, the body remains at ease. But the moment there is a fracture between these two, a subtle tension arises. This is not punishment in the moral sense, but exposure in the metaphysical sense. If you attempt to dwell in a state of lack while declaring abundance, or hold fear while performing confidence, the body reacts because it cannot lie. Suppressed emotions, denied feelings, and unacknowledged states do not vanish. They settle into the nervous system, the muscles, the breath. Emotional disturbances, especially those pushed out of awareness, are not abstract. They impress themselves upon the body, and over time, they demand recognition. This is why the body often becomes more sensitive as the inner man awakens. What once went unnoticed now produces discomfort. What once could be ignored now insists on being felt. The body is under compulsion to express subconscious impressions, and this compulsion is absolute. It does not respond to affirmations spoken without feeling, nor to mental declarations that contradict the lived inner state. If there is inauthenticity, the body signals it. If there is alignment, the body reflects it in ease, vitality, and coherence. In this way, the body becomes not an enemy, but a guide, revealing with honesty the state in which you truly dwell. This can be unsettling because it removes the refuge of pretending. You may find that you can no longer tolerate environments, conversations, or habits that once felt normal. The body tightens, reacts, or grows fatigued in situations that are out of harmony with your inner assumptions. This is not regression, it is refinement. The inner man is no longer content with divided states, and the body, being the most immediate expression of the subconscious, enforces this demand for congruence. It insists that what you are inwardly must match what you live outwardly. Over time, this sensitivity becomes a form of intelligence. The body tells you when you are dwelling in a false state and when you are resting in truth. It responds to authenticity with relaxation and to contradiction with resistance. Seen in this light, physical reactions are not obstacles to manifestation, but indicators of alignment. The body reveals, without commentary or judgment, whether you are inhabiting the state you claim to be in. And as the inner man continues to awaken, this feedback grows clearer, guiding you away from pretense and toward the simplicity of being what you are conscious of being. Awaken your inner power. Subscribe now and witness the signs your mind is already creating reality. Behind the body's refusal to cooperate with false states lies a deeper, impersonal law at work, one that operates with unwavering fidelity regardless of personal preference. The discomfort that arises when you are inwardly divided is not a psychological flaw or a nervous imbalance. It is the precise and faithful action of the subconscious mind. The subconscious does not reason, debate, or discriminate. It accepts the feeling impressed upon it as fact, and having accepted it, it moves immediately to express that fact in form. Its loyalty is absolute, not to your conscious intentions, but to the state you actually inhabit. This is why pretense collapses so quickly once the inner man awakens. The subconscious cannot be persuaded by what you say you are, only by what you feel yourself to be. Feeling in this context is not emotion in the dramatic sense, but the quiet knowing of being. When a feeling is impressed upon the subconscious, it is treated as an existing reality within consciousness itself. From that moment, the subconscious sets about producing the exact likeness of that feeling in the outer world, not symbolically, but literally. The world you experience becomes the echo of the state you have consented to inwardly. If there is misalignment, the body reacts because it is the first field of expression available to the subconscious. The protest you feel is not resistance, it is obedience. The subconscious must objectify the state you are truly inhabiting, not the one you are attempting to display. This is why there can be no compromise between inner assumption and outer expression. The subconscious is non-selective and impersonal. It does not reward good intentions or punish bad ones. It simply expresses what is impressed, with mechanical precision and creative inevitability. As awareness of this law deepens, a profound responsibility settles in. You begin to see that every persistent inner state carries consequences, not as moral judgments but as natural unfoldments. Fear, confidence, resentment, ease, worthiness, or lack are not abstract conditions. They are seeds impressed upon a creative medium that must bring forth after its kind. The outer world, including your own physical condition, relationships, and circumstances, becomes intelligible in a new way. Nothing is accidental. Everything is an expression of something already accepted within. This understanding strips away the illusion of randomness and replaces it with clarity. It becomes evident that transformation does not begin with changing conditions, but with changing states. The subconscious does not respond to effort, only to impression. When the feeling of a new state is impressed deeply enough to be accepted as fact, the subconscious cannot help but externalize it. In this realization, the inner man recognizes his true position. He is not struggling against life, he is impressing life, and life, faithful and exact, responds accordingly. As the inner state settles and the subconscious accepts it as fact, the relationship between inner life and outer events begins to reveal a quiet continuity that was always present, though rarely noticed. The boundary that once seemed to separate mind from matter starts to dissolve, not dramatically but naturally, as though a veil were thinning. What the world calls coincidence now appears in a different light, no longer as chance, but as sequence. Events unfold with a peculiar appropriateness, each one fitting into the next with a logic that only becomes visible in retrospect. You begin to move across what Neville described as the bridge of incidents, a chain of happenings that you did not consciously plan and could not have logically arranged. These events often appear ordinary on the surface, even trivial, yet they carry you, step by step, toward the fulfillment of an assumption already accepted within. There is no strain in this movement, no sense of forcing life into compliance. Things simply happen, and in happening they align you with outcomes that mirror your inner state. The bridge is crossed without awareness of its structure while you are on it. Only later do you recognize its elegance. What makes this experience unsettling for the rational mind is that the events do not ask for permission from your logic. They arise spontaneously, through conversations, delays, invitations, misunderstandings, or sudden changes of plan. Yet each one serves the same end. This is because the bridge of incidents is not designed by the conscious mind, but by the subconscious acting upon the impression it has accepted. The path is not chosen intellectually, it is generated automatically. The inner man does not concern himself with how things will happen. Once the state is assumed, the means are already implied. As this process becomes familiar, the sense of separation between thought and experience diminishes. You notice that the world behaves like a magnified mirror, reflecting not isolated thoughts, but sustained states of being. Impossibilities begin to soften. Doors open where none seem to exist. Resistance appears where a state has not yet been fully accepted. Nothing feels arbitrary anymore. Even delays take on meaning, not as obstacles, but as adjustments within the unfolding sequence. The outer world proves itself to be astonishingly obedient, though never in the way the conscious mind expects. This recognition brings both awe and sobriety. Awe, because life reveals itself as intimate and responsive beyond prior imagination. Sobriety, because it becomes clear that you are always crossing some bridge, whether consciously or unconsciously. Every accepted state sets a sequence in motion. The bridge of incidents is not activated by desire, but by assumption. When the inner man awakens, he sees that the path to fulfillment is not something to be engineered, but something to be allowed, knowing that once the state is real within, the world must reorganize itself to reflect it. As the bridge of incidents becomes undeniable, another realization emerges, one that is far less comforting than the idea of coincidence. The persistent alignment between inner states and outer events begins to dismantle the belief in luck, chance, or external causation. What remains is a sobering recognition. You are the sole cause of your experienced world. This understanding does not arrive as empowerment alone, it arrives as weight. To accept that you are the operant power is to accept responsibility not only for what you enjoy, but for what you endure. This burden reshapes the way you view help, effort, and dependence. The impulse to look outward for rescue or validation weakens, not because others lose value, but because you recognize that no one can assume a state for you. You may receive advice, encouragement, or information, but the directing mind remains yours. Action itself takes on a different meaning, no longer seen as the source of change, but as the expression of an already accepted inner position. The spring of action is internal, and what flows outward is determined by the state you have consented to be. There is a quiet severity in this realization because it leaves no room for partial acceptance. You cannot claim authorship of success while attributing difficulty to fate. The law does not negotiate. You are the cause of the phenomena of your life, whether labeled good, bad, or indifferent, not as a judgment, but as a structural fact of consciousness. Nothing appears by a power of its own. Every condition, without exception, is rooted in a state that was, at some level, occupied. This recognition dismantles the victim identity entirely, but it also removes the comfort of blaming unseen forces. Over time, the heaviness of this burden transforms into clarity. Responsibility, once accepted fully, simplifies life. Instead of reacting to appearances, you return attention to the only place where change is possible. The question is no longer who is responsible, but what state is being lived in. This shift does not make life smaller, it makes it precise. You are no longer scattered across circumstances, hoping they will rearrange themselves. You are centered in the knowledge that the inner man is the source, and that what he accepts must in due course be expressed. In this acceptance, power becomes quiet. There is no need to announce it, defend it, or prove it. The inner man understands that causation is not something to be wielded dramatically, but something to be honored with discipline and honesty. To live under this law is to live without excuses, but also without fear, because what is caused inwardly can be changed inwardly. The burden remains, but it is no longer oppressive. It becomes the gravity that stabilizes consciousness, anchoring life in meaning rather than chance. As the acceptance of soul causation settles into consciousness, its reflection becomes visible in an unexpected way. through the behavior of other people. You may notice that interactions begin to carry a different intensity, as though others are responding not merely to your words or actions, but to something unspoken that precedes them. This is because everyone you encounter is yourself pushed out, bearing witness to the state you are in. They are not acting independently of you. They are echoing the inner position from which you are living. When you dwell in a state of quiet confidence, the world answers in kind. Strangers offer trust without explanation. Opportunities arise without persuasion. Even neutral encounters carry an undertone of ease. Conversely, when there is inner conflict, doubt, or self-rejection, others seem to reflect that tension back to you, sometimes with surprising accuracy. Hostility, resistance, or misunderstanding appear not as personal attacks but as mirrors, revealing the whispers you have been speaking inwardly, often without realizing it. The reactions of others are not judgments, they are feedback. What makes this realization profound is that it removes the urgency to change anyone else. Attempts to control, correct, or convince others lose their appeal, because it becomes clear that their attitudes are not causes, but effects. As your concept of self shifts, their behavior must adjust to conform to that new concept. This is not manipulation, it is alignment. The inner man does not negotiate with appearances. He changes state, and the world rearranges itself accordingly, including the people who populate it. There is a certain humility that arises here, because you begin to see that praise and criticism alike are reflections, not definitions. Compliments no longer inflate, and disapproval no longer devastates, because both are understood as expressions of states. Others are witnesses to what you are conscious of being, not arbiters of your worth. This awareness softens emotional reactions and replaces them with observation. You watch the world respond, not with detachment, but with understanding. As this understanding deepens, relationships take on a new quality. They become less about negotiation and more about resonance. You recognize that harmony does not come from agreement, but from alignment within. When the inner state is stable, others fall into their corresponding roles naturally. In this way, the presence of others becomes one of the clearest confirmations that the inner man is awake, for the world no longer feels populated by separate wills, but by reflections faithfully bearing witness to the state you inhabit. As the awakening deepens, it becomes increasingly apparent that the world is not separate from your consciousness, but a mirror reflecting the state you inhabit. Every encounter, every situation, and every perception carries the imprint of what you are conscious of being. This reflection is precise and impartial. It does not flatter nor does it condemn. It simply amplifies the inner condition you occupy. When you recognize this, the world loses its authority to define your experience, for you understand that appearances are contingent upon internal states rather than external circumstances. The intensity of others' reactions often surprises those newly awakened. When you radiate authenticity, confidence, and dignity, the world responds with congruence, even when no words are spoken. Conversely, if conflict, doubt, or inner resistance are present, these too are echoed with accuracy. Others are not inherently difficult or agreeable. They are in each moment acting as living mirrors. This understanding reframes human interaction entirely, for it is no longer a matter of persuasion, influence, or adaptation. What is observed outside is a direct manifestation of what exists inside. This mirror-like quality of the world highlights the futility of attempting to change circumstances through effort alone. You cannot alter the reflection by attempting to alter the mirror itself. Destruction, criticism, or manipulation of external forms does not produce lasting change, because they do not address the root, the internal state. The only pathway to transformation lies within. When you change the state you occupy, the reflection must change to correspond. This principle is impartial and absolute, operating independently of belief, opinion, or desire for control. The profound implication of this truth is liberation. When the world functions as a mirror, you cease to be a victim of appearances. You are no longer swayed by praise or disturbed by criticism, for each reaction is understood as an echo of internal frequency. Life becomes intelligible in a way that removes confusion, frustration, and resentment. You begin to see that every external circumstance carries clarity about the state you are inhabiting, offering feedback without judgment. The mirror is neither friend nor foe. It is a neutral witness, faithfully reflecting the being you are. As awareness settles, a quiet authority emerges. Rooted in dignity, nobility, and self-recognition, you navigate the world not with effort, but with presence. The mirror ceases to intimidate and instead becomes a confirmation of alignment. The inner man sees that reality is not contingent on external power, but on inner assumption. When this is fully perceived, life itself becomes a teacher, demonstrating the truth that consciousness and not circumstance is the source from which all experiences flow. As the inner man awakens, a subtle separation emerges, cutting not outwardly, but inwardly. The familiar comfort of old patterns, social expectations, and habitual alliances begins to feel constraining. The self that once sought approval can no longer fully inhabit the new state of being. This is the sword Neville described. It divides the old from the new, compelling authenticity and clarity. Relationships, environments, and routines that once felt secure may no longer resonate, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence of growth. This separation often feels isolating because external validation loses its authority. Approval, agreement, or comfort from others no longer define the inner state. The awakened self must stand alone, guided only by inner conviction and the vivid authority of imagination. Yet this solitude is not emptiness. It is a fertile space where identity consolidates, where the new self can be fully assumed without compromise. The sword is precise, liberating, and necessary. It severs attachment to what cannot sustain the assumed state, allowing life to be approached with clarity and integrity. In this space, authenticity becomes both shield and compass, revealing the unshakable reality of the inner man fully awake and aligned. As the inner man continues to awaken, there emerges a subtle but serious risk: the spiritual ego. It is easy to mistake the signs of alignment, synchronicity, or inner authority for personal superiority. Yet true understanding reveals that the power at work is not the small individual self, but imagination itself, which is the operative divine principle. The awakened consciousness begins to see that all manifestation flows from this source, and that personal credit is an illusion. To confuse insight with superiority is to invite stagnation, for the inner state must remain humble and receptive. This danger manifests quietly. You may feel detached from others, or perceive yourself as more enlightened, more capable, or more awake than those around you. Such attitudes distort perception and compromise alignment because they are rooted in comparison rather than assumption. The inner man must recognize that all beings, regardless of external state, are expressions of the same underlying consciousness. Appearances differ only because of the states they inhabit, not because of inherent hierarchy or merit. Humility is therefore essential. Awareness of the creative power within should never become a tool for judgment. True awakening does not elevate the ego. It dissolves it into recognition of the universal intelligence operating through imagination. In this clarity, the inner man moves freely, unaffected by pride, secure in the understanding that the work is not personal, yet it is fully real. There comes a point in the awakening when effort and striving fall away, and a profound stillness replaces the need for validation or results. This is the Sabbath, a state in which the inner man rests fully in the truth he has assumed. The desire is no longer a question or a search. It is a certainty already accomplished within consciousness. Analysis, doubt, and anxious anticipation dissolve, leaving only quiet assurance that what has been assumed will inevitably manifest. In this state, work is no longer required because the creative process is complete at its source. The Sabbath is not passivity, but a confident alignment with the unseen. You no longer attempt to control or arrange the world, for you have entered the understanding that all external expression is a reflection of your inner reality. The mind, free from expectation, becomes a serene witness. The inner man rests, observing without interference, knowing that the assumed state carries its own power to objectify itself. This mental rest fosters a profound sense of security and liberation. Without needing affirmation from circumstances or others, you exist fully in the state you have chosen. The Sabbath is the culmination of the awakening, a still, unshakable presence in which the inner man is completely aligned, allowing the world to mirror back the reality that has already been realized within.